I think that was characteristic of the social milieu amongst Black people in Chicago in that era after the Second World War. There was a lot of status consciousness and status anxiety. I mean, I don't know how to actually say this. I mean, the people who lived in the projects, you definitely didn't want to hang out with them. I mean, they were losers and they weren't going anywhere. The reason that you're at 7329 South Michigan Avenue, where there are green lawns out in front of the houses and fruit trees in the backyards, and everybody takes care of their property and so forth, is so you don't have to walk across the Dan Ryan Expressway to the other side of the tracks, which were a stone's throw away, and get enmeshed in all of that shit. There were class differentiations of a relatively subtle nature about how people dressed, about their jewelry, about the cars that they were driving, about what they did for a living. And of course, not everybody was a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. A lot of people worked at the steel mill and the stockyards and whatnot, but they knew how to go to work, come home, take a bath, shave, put on your good clothes and show up for something that was commensurate with your aspirations for your status in life. And by the way, there was a lot of ongoing migration in my youth of Black people coming into Chicago on the bus or the train yesterday from Mobile, Alabama, and Tuscaloosa, Mississippi, and Memphis, Tennessee, and whatnot. And those country ass niggas, excuse me, but who didn't know, you could tell from the bright, loud colors that they were wearing, from the conch hairdos that they were sporting, from the honky tonk blues that and not the refined tones of an Ellington or a Count Basie or a Charles Mingus. You could tell that they were from the country, that they were, and that was a stratum above which, because we were three generations in Chicago by the time I came along, that you definitely didn't want to fall into that. So when my mother, who was wandering around with us and took us to the west side of the city, to a neighborhood that was very much not in keeping with my Auntie Lois's aspirations, she was absolutely appalled. And when the relationship, the marriage, my mother's second marriage fell apart, my aunt jumped at the chance to bring us into her home and into her supervision, because she knew the difference, and she wanted us on the right side of the line.
You've talked a lot in the past about how when you went to Northwestern and then when you went to MIT, you were the only Black person there. There were a few other Black students, not many, but you described yourself as like of a different class, and you described them as kind of like stuck up, not real, not authentic, not in the way that you saw yourself as authentic.
Yeah.
Help me with this. You know what I mean? Because you sound like you're on the other side of that line, or that you were raised in an environment that was on the other side of that line.
I was raised in an environment where she stood very clearly on the other side of that line, but where there was just a lot of ambiguity, and there was a lot of coming to terms with the fact that people backslid and that people fell, and not everybody was going to end up on the desirable side of the line. I mean, we were kind of intermediate in that sense. The light-skinned, and skin color had a lot to do with this in Chicago in the 1950s and 60s. The good hair had a lot to do with this. The light eyes, almost light brown or almost blue, almost green. These were the people who could think of themselves as, who you might think are thinking of themselves as being better than you. And that's an infuriating thought, that anybody thinks that they're better than you, even though you're damn sure that you're better than somebody else who's another step or two down the ladder. So Uncle Alfred, fathered 22, had polygamous multiple families across the the town, and worked very hard, loved all of his children and whatever. But he was quite a character. Uncle Mooney hustled, and that involved doing a lot of stuff that was on the other side of the law. Uncle Adler had gone to Morehouse College in the 1940s and early 50s. He was a contemporary, I don't think the same class, of MLK. My aunt saw to it, Elois, that my cousins Althea and Hortense matriculated properly at Fisk and got pledged and got admitted to a high-class sorority. Uncle Clarence knew gangsters. I mean, this is their cousin. I called him Uncle Clarence. This is my mother's first cousin. He knew the hard Italian guys, who, when they would hijack a truck and wanted to offload the goods, Uncle Clarence was at the table with a pile of cash, and he was able to do some business with these kind of people. It was very much a mixed bag. And while I was not at the bottom of the pecking order, I was also not at the top. And when I went east with a wife in tow and 2 children, or even when I went out to Northwestern University and encountered the African Americans out there as a full-time factory clerk who was married and stole hours to study away from his family and his job, I deeply resented what I thought of as rich black kids whom I was encountering at Northwestern. I thought they were superficial. I thought they had been handed life on a platter, and they were cliquish, at least as I perceived them. And I was determined not to compete for social acceptance with those people. First of all, I was smarter than any of them. This is as I said to Dan Riley in this interview that I shared with you, I'd go to my philosophy class and I'd read Nietzsche. And then I'd bump into these kids on the quad, and they wanted to tell me where the next party was. I say, man, when you read Nietzsche, you need somebody to talk to. They're superficial. What kind of clothes are you wearing? Well, I had a pocket protector full of ink pens in my plaid shirt.
Wow.
And my jeans and because I had to go to my clerk's job after I finished taking classes. And they're tooling around in their daddy's convertible, and these are the black kids.
Yeah.
Don't even get me started with the rich white kids. I mean, they were in a world that I had no access to or any way really of knowing anything about. This is my encounter with Northwestern University. I didn't compare myself or interact very much with them except politely as we passed on our way to class or whatever, or in an exchange about the course material that somebody might call to my attention. But the black kids, I didn't relate to at all well either. And I resented them. I resented the ease of their lives. I resented what I took to be their superficial engagement with, with the enormous intellectual smorgasbord laid out before us, which for me in my early 20s, I was older than these kids. And having this opportunity now to really study, I took it as gold. I mean, this was just, it doesn't get any better than this. I was lapping it up all the time. And they were living high on the hog, and they were, so it's a little bit of that. And that carried over to coming east to graduate school, when there was also a social scene amongst African Americans in Cambridge. Again, I'm married. I have 2 children. And even though we split in my second year, the second semester of my second year in graduate school, I began to socialize a little bit amongst the black cognoscenti, Harvard, MIT, Boston University crowd around in Boston. It was never my thing, and I never felt comfortable with them. And I paint with such a broad brush. I mean, obviously there are many different kinds of people, many good people. I made a few friends, but no, and then when I started developing a political coloration that was heterodox, that was kind of cutting across the grain on the questions of race, that's when my claim to authenticity rooted in my South Side origins, working / middle class. I mean, it was a combination of the two, really kicked in, because your mother is a fashion designer. Your father is a professor at the university. I mean, that was true of many, maybe even most of the African-American youngsters I encountered as a young scholar coming along. And you're going to tell me about what a black person is supposed to think? This was my attitude. You don't know anything about what a black person is supposed to think. Unfairly. I'm sure it's very unfair.